Hello, and welcome to our next episode of the TMG Fireside Chat. I'm your host, John Mackey. In this episode, we're going to be sitting down with Wills Moore, president of Agilitas Human Capital Consulting, and a good friend of mine. If you remember, Wills was on the podcast in episode number 1 back in January of 2023, where we talked about the importance of leadership and mentorship and how it helps to, really, support, I guess, all generations, people of, senior leaders as well as up and comers, and really trying to help support how we run our businesses and how we lead and how we connect with people. The reason for this episode is to highlight a few things. One, we are getting ready to start the cycle of conferences for NAFED, the National Association of Fire Equipment Distributors. And our first conference is coming up next week, March 7th and 8th in Las Vegas, to Planet Hollywood. And Wills has been invited to speak at all 3 NAFEDs this spring. So in Las Vegas next week, and in Atlantic City in April, and in New Orleans in May. And so I felt it was appropriate to bring Wills back onto the podcast to talk about his approach to NAFED and his topic for the conference, and hit some of the highlights about what he's going to be talking about. So hope you find the conversation insightful, worthwhile, and of course, as always, please like, follow, and subscribe to the TMG Fireside Chat podcast, which you should be able to find on your podcast outlets, as well as the Mackey Group channel on YouTube. It's a great opportunity for us to continue the message around all the great things we do in fire protection, get a number of different stories out, et cetera, et cetera. And the more followers we can generate, the more engagement we can create and really spread our story. So with that, let's get started with this week's episode with Wills Moore. Enjoy. Hello. Welcome to this episode of the TMG Fireside Chat. I'm your host, John Mackey. This episode, bringing back a good friend of mine, somebody who has actually an episode number 1 when we started this podcast in January of last year. And that's my friend, Wills Moore. Hello, Wills.
Good morning, John. It's great to be back.
It's great to see you. At least on video. We live in the same town, but now I'm in Arizona at my friend's house with this great view from South Mountain. And Wills, you're slumming it back in Fairhope. Sorry.
I am. It's not quite the same background there.
No, Fairhope's a little more flat, that's for sure. So great to have you back on the podcast. I think we'll talk a little bit more about what we presented last time, 14 episodes ago. And at that time, we talked about mentorship and the importance of, mentoring. I'll say 2 ways, being on the receiving end of mentorship as we built careers and we kind of navigated roles and companies and, trying to figure things out when we were much younger, and those who kind of helped us out. And now we're in, you and I both run adulting companies. And so we're now on the giving side of the mentorship relationship, which I think is how we pay it forward and share, what we've learned along the way with others and help guide and mentor them. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. But what I wanted to talk about on this episode is highlight the fact that you are going to be speaking at the up and coming NAFED conferences for 2024. That's very exciting.
Yeah, I couldn't be more thrilled. And again, that's thanks to you. I'm really looking forward to it. I've actually never been to Las Vegas in my life. So this is going to be a lot of new experiences on many fronts.
Well, that's great. Yeah, for those that may not necessarily understand the acronym for NAFED, because it's like every industry, we've got acronyms all over the place. So NAFED is the National Association for fire equipment distributors. Uh, they are in their 61st year. A great organization. I am a little biased. I just rolled off the board. I was on the board for 2 years. I've been an active member of NAFED for probably 15 years in one form or another. And today I sit on the advisory side of the board, and just continue to help and support all the great work that Danny Harris, who's the president, I think, or CEO of NAFED, and Ken May, who's the president, and Aaron Dickens, who's the outgoing president. So just a great group of people, and really excited for what they do. And as you and I talked about, we have the NAFED group does 3 different locations for their conferences. The first one's coming up here in March, and that's in Las Vegas, Nevada. That's going to be exciting. And then we'll to Atlantic City in mid-April, and then we wrap it all up in May on the Gulf Coast, much closer to home for you and I, and we'll be in New Orleans. But we'll get you in 3 different events, Wills, and give you an opportunity to give your topic. So, I want to hit some of the highlights with regard to the agenda overall for NAFED, just to kind of highlight some things, and then we'll get deeper into what your presentation is all about. So, for those that have never been to NAFED before, usually a mix between business, personal topics, discussions, as well as industry-specific product and some other things. So this year's not any different. The keynote speaker is a lady by the name of Tracy Stock, and she's giving a presentation on Tame the Turbulence, which is how to manage stress in our lives. So I think it's a very appropriate topic, just given all the craziness we've got going on around us. And I know, Wills, you and I've talked about your business, and we'll talk about Agilitas here in a second as well. But, I know you talk about, in the workplace, how to manage stress, how to manage, relationships, and, from an organizational perspective, how to deal with it. I think the topic itself is very appropriate for everything else going around us. Other topics, there's a DOT conversation about DOT compliance and what we do with fire extinguishers and what that means in the back of trucks. That's very industry specific there. And then we get into products. Amerex is given a presentation on dry chemical systems. Ansel is given a presentation on portable fire extinguishers, and I think something about their new products. And then Accurex is given a presentation about cooking appliances and ventilation and what's going on in the ventilation space. So all very apropos with regard to issues in our something that needs to be addressed. We also have a presentation on social media strategies. That's always constant, but I think something that we all have to do from every business. I know, Will, as you have a very strong, active footprint and engagement around your social media for your company, and I do the same with mine. Obviously, why we're doing the podcast as well. And then right before we get to the vendor expo, Wills, you get you're between people and beer, so you better have a good captive presentation. And then we wrap up the conference on Friday with FEMA, which is the Fire Equipment Manufacturers Association, giving a presentation on relations and what's going on from a lobbying perspective of the industry. And then we wrap up with a Cash is King presentation by another friend, Jerry Allen, the industry executive, and talking about how to manage cash flow and fire protection. And finally, Billy Marshall, who's the president of Service Trade, which is a service management software platform, talks about how to use technology to leverage the workforce. We're in a skilled labor shortage, and Billy has a presentation, which I've seen a couple times, that talks about how to use technology to become more efficient in how we use labor. So pretty well packed 2-day conference. Right in the middle of it, Wills, is your topic, which is, the ROI of company culture and how investing in company culture fuels growth and profitability. All right. So give us a couple highlights. What's the topic all about? And, what if you, what's the tease for the audience, if you will?
Yes. Well, I was thrilled. Obviously, I'm thrilled to be participating. I was really excited when you came to me, you and Danny, with this idea. And there's so much going on in the world of human resources today. Obviously, since COVID, things have just been more tumultuous and I think challenging. And really, what it does, all this creates more opportunities for companies that excel on the people side of their business. And so, talking about culture is a really a passion of mine. But I think, like any business owner, culture can feel squishy, and people are like, what does company culture mean? How do we measure it? Is it really worth the effort? Those kind of things. And so I'm going to be talking about really digging in more around, here are some of the different ways to define culture. Here are implications for having a great culture or having a poor culture, and some direct bottom line connections to that. Um, and then most importantly, talk about best practices around things that business owners, that companies can do to try to either build their culture, build on what may already be a good culture, or change their culture. And again, these are things, we have a range of different size organizations that are part of NAFED. And so these are not things that are just, relevant for big companies. It doesn't have to be super sophisticated, but there's a lot of fascinating data out there. We have so many different things happening that feed into this topic. So these are all some of the things I'm going to be touching on um, while I try to keep people engaged before happy hour.
Well, that's great. As I mentioned in the previous podcast, and as you know, my background, I started this whole thing in the human resources way, way back, 20 some years ago in my career. First half of the career was all HR. And so really understanding the importance of people and the role we play in our businesses and how we drive business. But at the core, the root of that is ultimately the organizations we work within, right? And the cultures, either from doesn't, like you said, large or smaller companies. And I think smaller companies are much more impactful with culture because you can touch it and feel it every day, right? You're not, there isn't this gigantic corporate office that's somewhere else in the country or somewhere else around the world telling you how you're going to run your business. No, it's localized. It's, the person in the desk next to you or the cubicle next to you, and the working relationship you have is reflective of the culture of your business, right?
Yes.
And it's much more rooted in the personal side of how we get work done, if you will, versus just the corporate side, a bit more buzzword like and a little bit more fuzzy.
Exactly. Well, I mean, yeah, smaller organizations, they can pivot on a dime. If you're the business owner slash CEO and you decide that you need to make a few changes and tweaks, we're not talking about a months long exercise and whatnot. So it's really can be a competitive advantage um, to companies to attracting talent, to keeping people. I think your industry, just like so many, has a huge turnover challenge. And you're trying to attract people from outside of the industry
Yeah.
to bring in new folks. So there are a lot of different aspects that really point to making this a priority.
So I know as you built this approach, you and I talked about just some folks that you could talk to really understand the industry flavor. And I'm not, I'm not asking this question with regard to identifying who those people are, but what are let's say one or two things that you took away from talking to either those managers, those technicians, or those owners, and they're some of the things they hit on around culture and why it's important to them.
Yeah, it was really fascinating and very helpful. And again, I heard a lot of reinforcement of the things we just touched on, some of the challenges the industry faces. It was also interesting to see just I think I talked to 5 or 6 different NAFED members, really the range of awareness and focus on this topic within their own business. And you can clearly tie those, they knew their numbers. They knew, especially companies with strong culture, with strong focus on people. Uh, there was a lot of good conversation around retention, around attraction, the cost of recruiting, those kind of things. So it was very eye-opening to understand, some of the uniqueness of the industry, but again, some of the same challenges that many other industries are facing. And I feel like I'm definitely more well informed about the industry, and I'm looking forward to meeting some of those folks too, face to face for the first time.
Well, that's great. That's great. Well, it's always nice to see new speakers come through the conference. I've been doing this conference for, like I said earlier, 10, 12 years, 15 years. And there's always a constant theme, and we always have a presentation at one point or another about, again, it's at the root of what we do and how we get work done, right? And so I'm excited that you're able to come to the conference, give a presentation on a topic I think that means so much to a lot of people, and in some cases they don't understand it, right? It's because it could be fuzzy, it could be a buzzword, and that it's about how we work together and how we get things done. What is the customer experience from our culture and how we manage that? I mean, it impacts so many things. So we're excited that you're going to have an opportunity to get to the conference and speak, and I'll have a chance to introduce you to a lot of my industry friends, and a lot of new people that even I don't know. I go to this thing a lot, but there's a lot of new faces every year too. So very excited for it. I will make it. I am not a gambler, so in Vegas, so I will not be gambling. But if you want to go play blackjack, I'll watch you.
I'll have to brush up on my rules and regulations. Yeah, I'm not either. I'm pretty risk averse.
Yeah, yeah. So
It'll be a lot of fun, and yeah, it'll be. I think again, one of the things that back to the idea of stress and the keynote speaker, a lot of leaders are dealing with just even more coming at them day to day. And one of the things I work on with leaders on when I do consulting work is this concept of working on the business versus in the business,
mhm.
and being able to step back and look at saying things like culture as part of a broader view of your people, and is something that's really not easy to do, but there's incredible value, and that's part of what I hope to really kind of make the point with um, when we meet and talk on in Vegas.
Yeah, very good, very good. Well, looking forward to it. It's going to be a lot of fun. All right, so let's go back a little bit to what we talked about in the first podcast, and we kind of teased a little bit when we started this episode. But one of the things when we start down this path with regard to the podcast first was just to continue a platform to just get topics that everyone's talking about one way or the other. The importance that um, we see in certain things, and ultimately the influence that we can have to keep the conversation going on things that are important. And so back then it was around mentorship, the importance of mentorship. I had just done an interview with Todd Stevens coming out of FSSA and talked about what that looks like with regard to the role of mentorship and leadership in the Fire Suppression Systems Association itself. Wanted to talk to you about specific to the podcast was how that string continued with every podcast. So if you're a subscriber of the podcast or a continual follower of what we release, I've always asked the question at the end of every interview, all right, we have somebody that was most influential and most impactful in our career, and you've had an opportunity to go back and work with somebody. Who would that be? And at that context, for that podcast, I talked about Dennis Kennedy was very influential for me as relates to, and he had just retired at that point with regard to fire protection. And you made a reference to one of your former mentors, even a coach that helped you even start your consulting practice. If you want to drop his name, I forget it right now, but who's that person you referenced? Do you remember?
Yes, Brandon Smith.
Yeah.
And Brandon is a friend and runs a leadership development business providing training programs for frontline leaders across the country.
Yep. And then so that continued as we went through the topic. And what was interesting was that a lot of those questions I asked were cold. I mean, I did not, the interviewee did not know that unless they watched a previous episode, they were waiting for it. But in most cases, they did not know what was coming. So the answer was always really, really interesting. And what people went to. Some of them were their football coach in high school, and some of them were somebody they worked with alongside with or served with in the military, and or an old former, I shouldn't say not old, a former industry expert or icon. When I interviewed Lee Kaiser, who's the engineering VP for ore protection, Seneco, who's one of the former leaders of Kidde Fire Systems, and engineer of a number of things that we see from a fire systems perspective. And Lee called out Joe around his mentorship and how important Joe was to Lee's development. So I thought it was really, really interesting as it relates to, especially in a cold question, how people respond to that. And because now you get to the root of it. I think even our conversation, I didn't prep you as it relates to who was impactful for you. And, first one that came to mind was, again, the relationship you have with Brandon and how impactful he was on the things you do.
Yeah. Well, I think we've all had, again, people who have touched our lives, some in bad ways, some in good, mostly in good. I mean,
Yeah.
we've all had some bad bosses, some maybe toxic colleagues, but I think it is really important at any stage in life to reflect on that and really honor that and kind of value it, and then think about how do you replicate that? How do you pay that forward? Like you said earlier.
Yeah.
There's an interesting word now called, which you may have heard, called Minturn. So as certain parts of the population get older, present company included, we have this kind of growing change in the demographics of the workforce, and you have also a growing change in who is really up to speed on technology and the digital side of the world. And so there's much more focus on kind of the two-way mentoring, and that's why they call it a Minturn. So meaning, if you're the wizened veteran, maybe you start mentoring a young up and comer, but there's probably a lot you can learn from them as well, things around AI, whatever the case may be. So been fun to see things like that develop in terms of even that word or that nomenclature.
Yeah, we made the reference in the podcast too around it. We could refer to it as a two-way mentorship, right?
Yeah.
And don't be closed off with regard to it just being one way, older generation to newer generation. There's a lot that we can learn, from the younger generation, as they're coming into the workforce or they've been in manager roles or whatever, because, the work environment is changing, right? And as leaders, we've got to be flexible to understand, what does it mean? Right. And so how do we get more work done with a different environment? Right. So very interesting, but very important with how we build organizations. So lastly, I don't think we were talking about this in the last podcast, but I do want to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit more about Agilitas. Right. I think you've been doing this for about the same time I have, about 4 years or so, right? Packaging all the things that you've learned and experience through your 20 plus 25-year plus HR career, right? So talk about Agilitas, a little plug about what you do and the type of services you provide to your clients.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that opportunity. So I'll start with the word Agilitas, which is Latin for agility, and agility is something that's always been kind of a passion of mine, and you see it in the most successful people. They have the ability to pivot. They have the ability to be put into unknown situations and thrive. So I kind of trying to play on that theme. And really, what I do is work with growing companies to help them look across all aspects of the people side of their business, which is typically the biggest line item on their P&L, and figure out how they can continue to raise the bar in terms of retention, culture, traction, even things like hiring people more efficiently. So what I typically do is look at, I come in alongside of business owners, CEOs, and really do kind of a holistic, I would say, an audit almost of their HR operations, and that really runs the gamut again from very tactical to more strategic, things like culture and engagement, and then come back to them with a set of recommendations about things that they can do to improve some of the things I just touched on. Maybe they're struggling with turnover, maybe they're not attracting the right talent, maybe they've got some frontline leaders who they're trying to really raise up. So what I found during my career, which kind of fed into this, was that it's rarely just one thing that you need that's the
Right.
magic bullet, so to speak. It's usually there are multiple opportunities and multiple ways to positively impact the business. So what I do basically is kind of work with companies to help identify and implement a number of different changes that help them, continue to excel from a people standpoint, if you will.
And again, we talked about it, throughout this episode, and we've talked about it in other episodes. That, people are the core, right? And we all have skills, right? It might be technical, it might be, as a technician, it might be administrative, it might be strategic, but it's how we're going to get it done is through people. And just because your career path may not be, director of human resources or human resources manager or recruiter or compliance specialist, right? We all have HR, human resources, that we've got to manage one way or the other, right? Human capital, I think, is what you have in your tagline for your business, right? And so
Yes.
it is an investment, usually in time, but then also follows with some investment in money. But at the end of the day, when you do it right, it really does pay off. And glad to see that you're doing that good work. So thank you for providing that service. Well, cool, very good. Well, Wills, I want to wrap up the podcast there, but I, really, thankful, grateful that you have the opportunity to speak at NAFED. Really looking forward to, seeing you up on stage, and then, getting you more exposure to this great industry, fire life safety, and a lot of things we've got going on, and hopefully this gives you an opportunity to, meet some great people, maybe some new clients for you, and do more road trips with me, wherever I'm at, if it's Phoenix, like over my shoulder, or, New Orleans, Atlantic City, and Vegas here in the next few weeks, or, whatever else the future may hold for us. Looking forward to it.
Again, I'm thrilled. I'm super excited about it. I think it's a great industry, very dynamic. And so it's really, I think, a very appropriate time and topic for folks who will be at the conference. I feel like they're going to get a lot of benefit out of it.
Want to talk more with Wills, obviously track him down at the NAFED conferences, introduce yourself in person. All the contact information is going to be in the notes, if not show on the graphics, with regard to how to contact Wills, his website, phone number, email, you name it. And the same can be said for the Mackey group, and what we're all about as well. And with that, Wills, enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. And great talking to you. And I will probably see you face to face in Vegas, because I'm only home for a few days here in the next week and a half. So great talking to you. Thanks for the time.
Thanks, John. Have a great day.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us on this episode. Really hope you found our conversation useful, insightful. Hopefully it gave you a little bit of information about Wills, his business, as well as his presentation that we're going to see at the upcoming NAFEDs. And as you're looking for any information about Wills, how to contact him, or John Mackey and the TMG podcast, and or the Mackey group, you can find all that information in the notes. And as always, please like, follow, subscribe, etc., on all the socials, so we can continue to get our information out and share the story around the fire protection space and the great work that we do. So with that, thank you. And until next time, be safe.